wooded area owned by the Department of Transportation, and it's just east of downtown Seattle. And it's the area where Interstate 5 intersects with Interstate 90. Interstate 5 is the north-south freeway that goes from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, and Interstate 90 is the east-west that goes from Seattle to Boston. So anyway, in this area, there's maybe 20 acres of wooded area. And as you can imagine, a lot of the street people and stuff kind of went back there and set up camp and would do all these kind of things. So on this afternoon, it was September of 1997, I'm sorry, a couple of transients were walking through the jungle and they came across a woman's body. This woman was tied up, gagged, and had a belt around her throat. So they ran out onto the Interstate 90 shoulder and they saw a state trooper coming by and they flagged him down and they told him what was going on. He walked back there and found it. And of course, he called the Seattle Police Department because we have jurisdiction over things like that. And State Patrol in Washington is a traffic agency. They don't investigate crimes like that. So we detectives. I didn't go to this scene because I wasn't working, or I don't remember why. But detectives went out to the scene. They found this woman lying on her back, black female, about 30. She had her hands tied in front of her with shoelaces and her feet tied with shoelaces. She had a piece of duct tape across her mouth and a men's belt around her throat. Of course, when you get these cases, especially someplace like the jungle, the first problem is to identify who the victim was. And so the detectives there started doing some work, and they fingerprinted her the next day at the medical examiner's office. They found her name was Denise Harris, and that she had been a preschool teacher, but had gotten hooked on crack cocaine and kind of went downward spiral, and she'd been missing for a couple of days. So they started working that case. And again, I knew about the case. I saw the pictures. I didn't have anything to do with the early case. Now we're going to fast forward to January 10th, 1998. It was a Saturday, and I was actually home. And early in the morning, I got a call, early in the morning meeting, like 8 o'clock. I got a call that a woman's body had been found in a stairwell off of Airport Way South. And it's very close. At that time, it was very close to the Kingdome. Now it's very close to T-Mobile Park and Lumen Field, where the Seahawks and Mariners play. So I responded to the scene. And there was a body down in, first of all, I should mention, this case was profiled on American Detective with Joe Kenda last year. And the episode, if you want to look it up, is Murder, Murder, Murder is the name of the episode. But they talk about this case. Anyhow, so I get there to the scene, and there's patrol cars have a guy in the backseat of a car. There's a woman at the end of an exterior stairwell laid at the bottom, and she's all spewed out, and there's blood everywhere. She's on an old abandoned mattress. And so I talked to the officers there, and they said, yeah, these two guys, it was very cold that morning, colder than it normally gets in Seattle. Because I mean, most of the time in Seattle, the winters are high 30s, low 40s. This was like 10 degrees. So it's extremely cold. And a couple of transients were walking by when it was still dark, and they were going to go down that stairwell, but they could see someone down there, so they left. And they came back after daylight and looked down, and the person was still there. And then they realized that this person, they saw the blood, realized this woman was dead. So they call the police. Police come, and one of the officers tell me that one guy that's in the back seat, he has blood on his clothing. Well, that piqued my interest right away because, again, it's an outside scene. This woman's got it ends up this woman's throat had been cut. We didn't know it at that time. We just knew she was stabbed or something. And so I have him taken to my office, which is only about 6 or 7 blocks away. And we look at the scene, and I talked to him. I went back to the office and talked to him, and I said, how'd you get the blood on your clothes? And he goes, I got in a fight earlier tonight, and that's my blood. I said, did you go down in the stairwell? And he goes, no, I didn't. I only looked from the top. And I said, so there's no way in the world that blood is her blood. And he said, no way in the world. I said, okay. I got him a hot cup of coffee and stuff. And then I gave him a Tyvek suit to change it. So I said, I'm going to have to take your clothes because I got to do a lab to make sure it's not his. I can't take his word for it, obviously. And then I take him back to where he's staying at a halfway house thing, not far from the scene. So again, we have a woman in a stairwell, this time on a Saturday. We don't know who she is, and it's going to be Monday before we can find out. I went back and did some more work, but on Monday, I found out that this girl, she came back by fingerprints as Olivia Rocha, aka Olivia Smith. And Olivia was a native girl, 20 years old, 21 years old. And like Denise, she had the crack cocaine addiction. Let me back up just a second. So she was in the bottom of that stairwell. And one thing I noticed that her shoes were like halfway untied from her shoelaces were unlaced from her shoes on one shoe. And I thought that was interesting. And I remembered the case over there, but again, physically, as the crow flies, it was about 150, 200 yards from Denise Harris's scene across Interstate 5 and up in the jungle. This is just on the west side of Interstate 5 where she was found. But what you do with these cases, when you have these cases that could be that, is you never assume they're a serial case. You individually, you have to investigate each one individually. And if they come together, they come together organically. You can't force them together or you'll screw up your case. So again, I just had it in the back of my mind, found out who she was. She had 3 huge slashes to her throat. One of them exposed. It opened her larynx. It opened all her major blood vessels. She bled out very quickly. She had a couple of 2 more, not as deep slashes in her throat. So now, flash ahead to early February of 1998, about a month after Olivia's body was found. I'm in the office. It's a Sunday afternoon. I'm by myself in the office working on a case. I'm working on that case when the phone rings, and it's the radio operator, and they say, there's a unit down at this address of called Poplar Place South, and they found a body behind a warehouse. So I go down there. It's dusk. It's just starting to mist. It's not raining. It's just misty. And I just go down there to check it out first, because bodies are found all the time. First of all, there's dead bodies found almost every day in a city like Seattle. Most of them are not murders. Okay. Most of them are overdoses or naturals or things like that. So I went down there to check it out and met the patrol officers and the sergeant. And they walked me back behind this big warehouse. And this warehouse abuts back to Interstate 90, right where it curves before it intersects with Interstate 5. So I go back there and they go, there's a guy was another transient was back there looking for bottles and cans, and he came across a skeleton. So I said, let's go back there and look. And I went back and I shined my light. Again, it was dusk and it's hard to see. And the thing I remember was I couldn't see anything at first. And the officer goes, see, that's the shirt right there. And he's pointing to it. And there's the head. And all of a sudden it just kind of appeared to me. And then I could see it. Skeletons are hard to find. They're like camouflage. You can walk right by one and not see it in a wooded area. So I saw it. And what I saw was a skull with a mouth wide open and agape and there's a gag across the mouth. And so I call more people in. We start doing a crime scene. We call a forensic pathologist to the scene, because they go to all bones cases, and we start looking at this scene. One of the things I remember was the forensic pathologist, Dr. Kathy Taylor, was down on her hands and knees, and she was reaching underneath the skeleton and pulling her hands out and reaching. She was wearing a shirt, the skeleton one. Kept reaching in, and about the 3rd time she reached in and pulled her hand out, a rat with a 10-inch body, not counting the tail, came running out of that hole. And she screamed. It ran over my toes. I started laughing. Kathy was freaking out, and good times. So anyway, once we got the body moved, we found out that the arms and legs were tied behind it. And guess what with? Shoelaces. Yeah. So now I go, she is triangulating with Olivia Smith and Denise Harris. They're all within a couple hundred yards of each other. And maybe she might have been a little more. She might have been about a half mile from Denise Harris's spot. And that's the first time I said the word, when one of the sergeants said, first time I said the word serial killer. I said, these are all the same. The same guy did all these. And so I got with Mike Szynski, who would later become my regular partner, but he was the one that had that Denise Harris case. And we joined our investigation and we started working. So a few days into this, we get a call from the jail. It's an inmate. And this inmate says, I was at the scene when Denise Harris was murdered, and I know who did it. And so we went over to the jail and got him and brought him back to the office. And we started asking him. First thing, people say this crap all the time in the jail, right? And you have to prove that he's talking about, really, he's not making this stuff up. Just looking, he wanted help getting out of jail, which they all do. So we had him describe the scene, and he described it so accurately. Matter of fact, he said, I stood up and there was a beer can on a busted tree branch above her body, and I hit my head on it. Well, there was a beer can on a tree branch above the body. So he said, this guy was definitely there. And we said, well, who's the guy? And he says, well, at first he wanted, I need to know that you're going to do something for me first. I said, man, there's no guarantees. We got to know you're not bullshitting us, you know? And he said, okay, the guy's name is Mark Smith. And I look at Mike Szynski, I look at myself, and I'm thinking to myself, Mark Smith, what a bullshit name. This guy's right. And so he tells us that this guy drug him up there and he choked him out and everything. And so we let him go back to the jail. We take him back to jail. And we're talking, I go, this is bullshit. But this guy was definitely there. You know, I should have had the pictures ready. So I could have showed you some pictures. Let me real quick do this, and I can probably get some pictures. Oh, no, I can't, because they're on another drive downstairs. Anyway, I was going to show you the scene pictures. So we start talking and doing all this stuff. And then later, we bring him back over a couple days later, and we're talking to him, and we challenge him. We say, you know, this is bullshit. There's no Mike Smith or Mark Smith. And he goes, and he starts hemming and hawing. And then he puts his head on the table, and he said, this, by the way, he's a black guy, about 30, very street smart. He's actually pretty intelligent. I mean, he's not stupid. Because he reads a lot of books. We found out later, and we could have conversations with him. But so he tells us, finally, we going back and forth. What you do is you basically play chess until you get him in a corner. Then you say checkmate. Okay, right? That's what these interrogations are like. We said, that's bullshit. You did these, Dwayne. His name is Dwayne Lee Harris. You did these. And he goes, then he puts his head in and he goes, man, yeah, okay, I killed her. And he goes, I've been killing all my life. That's what he said. And I'm tired of it. So we start talking to him about that. And then he admits, he describes the scene. He lured her up there. He's met her downtown, lured her up there with a promise of crack cocaine if she'd have sex with him. And when he got her up there, he smacked her in the face, knocked her down. Now, he said he had sex with her, but he didn't say if she was dead or alive. I think she was dead when he had sex with her, because he kind of hemmed and hawed about that. I think he killed her. He had sex with her after she was dead, but he tied her up and got her all. I mean, before that. So then we start talking and we go. And one of the things we did is he says he's killed others, and we're gonna have him show us. So we put him in a car, and we're driving. And I told Mike was driving. I was in the back seat with him, and I said, drive down Airport Way past Olivia Smith's scene. And so he did. We got him in the car. He's driving down Airport Way. And as we pass the stairwell where Olivia Smith had, his head turns and goes like this. And I'm in the back seat. I said, you did that one too, didn't you? Yeah, he said. And so we start talking about it. And I said, so I started talking about that one. I said, we had Beck recorded him while we were talking in the car. And one of the things I said was, so what happened with that? And he said, same thing. He saw her, he lured her down there with a promise of sex in the stairwell, and then he attacked her. And he said, and he was starting to undo her shoelaces so he could tie her up, and she pulled a knife, and he cut his finger, and he got really mad. He says, I took that knife and I cut her throat. And I said, Dwayne, did you cut her throat one time? He goes, no, man, I cut her throat 3 times. So this is the type of stuff you're looking for, corroboration. So he's not just bullshitting you and making up a false confession. You look for little details like 3 times. Nobody would have known it was 3 times unless it's the one that did it. I knew that from the autopsy. That's why detectives should always go to the autopsy. Anyway, and then so then we got him later on to confess to the other girl, the skeleton who we identified as Twinette Jones. Twinette, again, she was a mixed black and white woman, about 30. She, again, had been missing for a month or 2. Nobody had reported her missing. She had a crack addiction. And the ironic thing was, as we figured out, Twinette, the skeleton, was actually the first of the 3 killed, but the last discovered. So, and he told us about that one. One of the things he said about that one is I got her up over the fence and I smacked her and I unlaced her shoelaces. And first of all, when you talk to Dwayne, if you're just having a conversation, he's very pleasant and just talks normal. When you start talking about his kills, it gets guttural and his voice goes down. And he starts doing this stuff like he's reliving the crime. And he said, I smacked her, and she said, you don't have to do this. I got babies at home. And I told her, I don't want to hear that shit. You tell it to Jesus when you see him. And he choked her out. And he said, I waited till her eyes bulged and she pissed herself and I knew she was dead. That's what he said. And then he had sex with her too, I think, after death. And he told us, he goes, I wasn't alone there, man. There was another guy with me. And he goes, I go, who was with you? And he goes, guy's name's Wow Wow Wes, like the gunfighter. That's what he said. So as it ends up, we knew who Wes was. He was a burned out crackhead, older guy, like 60s, that hung out downtown. So we took Dwayne back to jail. Then we went out and looked for Wes, and we found him and brought him in. I had him sitting in the chair, like this guy had just burned out. And I said, Wes, we have information. You were present during a murder we're investigating. And he just screamed, ah! And he fell on the floor in a fetal position. He goes, no. And then all of a sudden he stopped. He looked up at me with a perfectly conversational voice and goes, but I'll say I was if you want me to. No, Wes, we picked him up and pushed him out the door. That was bullshit too. Harris was just bullshitting. So ironically, a couple weeks later, another detective in the homicide unit was investigating a completely unrelated murder that happened in a motel room. And he said, hey, I got this 16-year-old prostitute girl who's a witness, and she's staying at her grandma and grandpa's house out in Redmond, which is east of Seattle. That's where Microsoft is headquarters. It's it's not a cheap neighborhood. And would you go out there and pick her up and bring her in for me, to Mike and I? Yeah, we'll do it. So we drive out to Redmond, and her grandparents are just very nice people. They have this beautiful property out there. And we get this little girl, Aisha was her name, in the back of the car. It's a Friday afternoon. We're driving back across the 520 floating bridge. And I'm driving, my partner's in the back seat. And I say, and he's talking to her, he goes, man, Aisha, your grandparents love you. You got to get off the street. It's dangerous. Bad stuff's happening. And she goes, yeah. And he goes, has anything bad happened to you? And she goes, yeah. One time this guy picked me up and he took me to his house and he got me naked and he tried to tie me up. He tied me up with his shoelaces, with my shoelaces. He was going to kill me, but I broke away and ran down the street naked. And I'm like, I almost ran off the road. Who did what? And he goes, do you know his name? He goes, he go by Chili Willie. Well, that's a street name that Dwayne Harris used. So what are the odds that we're in the car with her when she tells this story? So we go back and get Dwayne out of jail the next day, and we're talking to him, and we mention this girl, and he gets all guttural, and he's really pissed. He goes, we're going to kill that bitch, but she got away from me. So there's would have been the 4th victim, but she got away. There's always, in these cases, there's almost one that got away. Almost always one that got away. So we were doing all this stuff. One of the things, like I said, we had a lot of recordings of his with him. And one of the recordings, which is the most chilling recording I've ever captured, and I actually cut out this little section, and I have it. And on that Joe Kenda thing, they played it, and that's where the name of the thing is, that came to the name of that episode, is he's describing to me how he's luring Twinette Jones back behind that warehouse. And he's saying, I'm looking for my spot, and I can't go there. And I go, so I take her down the other side, and I go, well, Dwayne? He goes, yeah. You were going just to look for a place to do dope, were you? He goes, what? No, you had a plan. He goes, yeah. What was your plan, Dwayne? He goes, murder, man, murder. He's a nice guy. He's single, if you guys, any of you ladies looking for somebody. Although he'll be tied up for the next 100 years or so. But other than that, anyway, so we got him in there, and we got all these things charged. Like I said, he'd always ask for a cappuccino. Give me a cappuccino. Yeah, so we'd give him cappuccinos. One time we were going on one of these field trips, we called it field trips with Dwayne, looking for. He took us to a few other sites where women were really killed, but he didn't know enough about the case. And I went, this is bullshit. He didn't do this. He's trying to confess to cases he didn't do, right? Because he couldn't describe where the body was. All the other ones that he was at, he could describe them down to the T. But one time we were on a field trip, and I'm in the car. It was a minivan, and we parked it in the basement of headquarters. He gets in. I'm in the back seat, and I have a sawed-off 12-gauge shotgun on my lap. He looks at me and goes, he looks at me, he starts laughing. He goes, Cloyd, where you got that shotgun, man? And I laughed. I said, well, Dwayne, if you run from me, I'm going to kill you with it. And he laughed, and I laughed, and I said, I'm serious. He goes, oh. So, that was field trips with Dwayne. We went to trial, and he was out of control in trial. He would get up in the middle of the trial and throw a chair across the room. Finally, the judge had him put in what we call a Hannibal Lecter chair. You know, he's all tied down during the trial, and eventually he was still disruptive. So what they did is they put him in a small closet down the hallway with a closed circuit TV to watch, with an attorney in there with him, and his attorney wearing an earphone. Speaking of his attorney, so his main attorney was named John Hicks, who I know real well. He's a good guy. And we were in the middle of trial one time, and Hicks, Dwayne goes over to whisper something in Hicks's ear, and it's just he and I and Dwayne in the room along with the guards, and Hicks's face just turns red. And they take Dwayne out, and Hicks is sitting over there, and I said, John, he didn't just threaten you, did he? And John, you got to know him. He goes, that son of a bitch, I got a gun. He comes anywhere near me, I'll kill him. He's talking about his client. And I go, wow, that's just like that movie, Cape Fear. That can't really happen in real life, can it? And he said, oh. I'll get back to that story in a minute. So he leaves out of the courtroom. Anyway, so finally we go through the song thing and this trial, play all our recordings. The jury was so upset by what they were hearing that they actually asked for the court to pay for psychological counseling for them, and the court did. But so we, yeah, it was that bad. So he was convicted and sentenced to basically life. It was sentenced like 96 years in prison. By the way, if you run his name on YouTube, there's a bunch of news videos on there of him, and they interviewed him in jail. And they show some of his courtroom stuff, and it's interesting to watch or get his personality. It's about a 15-minute news clip under Dwayne, Dewayne Lee Harris. So anyway, at the end of trial, after he's convicted, we're in the courtroom. My partner and I, the two prosecutors that prosecuted him, we're putting all stuff, getting ready to go. And one of the prosecutors, let's go down to the Merchant's Cafe and have a beer, which is the oldest bar in the city of Seattle. It's from the 1880s. And I go, yeah, let's go. And I look over at John Hicks, his attorney, who's moping around. I go, hey, John. He goes, yeah, we're going down to the Merchant's Cafe for a beer. Why don't you go with us? He goes, what? Come on, let's go. Okay. So we all went down to the Merchant's Cafe and we ordered beers. And it was just before Christmas. And I said, John, listen, Mike and I really appreciate you vigorously defended Dwayne, but you didn't use any stupid little silly tricks. So, well, we got you something for Christmas. I handed him a gift. And instead of a bow, it had shoelaces for the bow. And he opened it up, and it was a tape of Cape Fear. And he started laughing and knocked his beer over. And we're still friends to this day. But Dwayne was an interesting guy. He liked to talk. I went and saw Dwayne along with Lee Meller, who's a friend of Colton's and I, who's a criminologist. He actually lives in Wales now, but he's Canadian. And he told me one time, if I come to Seattle, I want to go see Dwayne. I said, okay. So he came and we went down to prison and saw Dwayne. And Dwayne had some interesting things to say. First of all, this was, let's see, he was in 97, 30 years after his conviction almost. Not quite, 28 years, 25 years. Anyway, he said, one of my favorite quote of him was, this serial killer thing isn't as glamorous as I thought it was going to be, which I thought was pretty good. He knows he's never getting out of prison. He says, my daughter asked me, his daughter was little then, but she is much older. She's an adult now. And she goes, Dad, why do you do this stuff? She didn't want to talk to him. He goes, I don't know, maybe I got a marble loose in my head or something. That's what he told her. And he told us, and I don't know if this is true, he told us that when he was growing up, his dad ran a funeral parlor and he used to go in there at night and mess with the bodies. And that may be true. It has a ring of truth to it. And I don't know why he'd say it if it wasn't true. But, and then he just said how he has to watch his back in prison. And you know, he's an old man now. He's not old. He's 50 something, maybe 60 now, but he looks a lot older than he is. That's the first. Anybody have any questions about that case? And then I'll move on to the next one. He was in jail for a robbery charge, not related to murder or anything. Yeah. I should have mentioned also one of the ways we showed it was, first of all, we end up getting DNA in the end from his blood was found in that stairwell, and we got his DNA from Denise. Obviously, Toinette was too old to get DNA off of. But one of the things he told us is after that Olivia cut his finger pretty bad, and he needed to go to the hospital. And so, and he said he went to his wife's, oh no, it was his girlfriend's brother, and said, yeah, I need to go to the hospital. And the guy said, took him to the Greyhound station, and he had to go to Portland because he couldn't go to Seattle because somebody might find him. So he went, and we confirmed he did go down there, was there that day, and he had he made up a lie why he cut himself. And so that all corroborated his testimony. But we went to talk to this guy that gave him the writing. And what did Dwayne tell you? Well, he told me he had to go to the hospital. He said he killed somebody. And I said, you didn't think about calling the police? Because no, he's told me that before. Like it was no big deal. That's the world we live in. Yeah. So the robbery, it was a robbery too. Like he mugged somebody on the street. That's what he was in jail for. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to the next one. This is one that not all serial killers look alike or seem alike. Okay. Sometimes they get thrown out at a left field. And this one was on I first got called to this in the middle of the night on June 1st, 2014, that there were two young black males shot dead in an intersection at 29th and South King in Seattle. Well, first of all, 29th and South King is in the central area, and there have been a lot of shootings, gang-related shootings in that area at the time. And so, first of all, for whatever reason, the most of the murders I investigated, especially in the last part of my career, were not gangbanger murders or those type. They were all weird stuff, and it's the luck of the draw because they're just on the list, and when your number comes up, it's your case. And they were all like this kind of stuff. And a couple other guys in my squad who seemed to get all gangbangs. Gangbangs are pain because nobody wants to talk to you. And it's pulling teeth to get information, that type of stuff. And they started laughing when they heard I had this one because I thought it was a gangbang. So we go down to the scene. I pull up. By the time I get there, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Two young black males dead at the scene. And they've been shot multiple times. One of them been shot once in the back of the head, and the other one was shot like 5 times at close range in the face. Okay. So let me tell you about looking at wounds and what they mean when you have these type of things. It told me that the first guy that got shot with one shot in the head, he would just get rid of him. The beef was with the other guy, because when you get shots or wounds to the face, that's personal. It's either personal one-on-one, or you're displacing this person for somebody else you're really mad at. So it's a vicious personal attack. And he was also shot 4 or 5 times other parts of his body. So one of the things we do with those cases, well, first of all, we're at the scene, and this is rabbit holes. Every time you have a whodunit like this, you go down a bunch of rabbit holes before you find the one that is. We're at the scene, and the police dispatcher gets on the air and says, they got a guy calling 911. He says his brother just called him and told him he needs him to pick him up because he just shot somebody in the face. And I'm like, well, there you go. Easy. And apparently the guy is walking along I-5 near downtown. And so we figured this is the guy. So myself and a prosecutor that was at the scene, because prosecutors go to the scene in these cases, jump in a car and go racing toward I-5. In the meantime, the state patrols found a guy walking on I-5 that we thought it was him. It's not him. So I go back to my office, and the first thing I do with these cases is I run their name, pull up their last booking photo, so I have photos of the people in life. and get their criminal history and all this stuff. Well, I run these two guys' names, and there's no booking photo. And they go, well, that's odd. And there's no criminal history under those names. And I know they're not phony names because I have the real driver's license in my hand. And well, of course, that should have been a clue because it was a driver's license, not a state ID card. Because most of these gangbanger types have suspended license, so they get ID cards. And these guys had actual license. So I started looking into their background. And it took me till the next day till I realized these guys are not criminals at all. Matter of fact, they're both gay men. They're both gay black men. They both have jobs. One of them speaks, his name is Dwan Anderson, speaks fluent Japanese, was about to go to Japan for a year on some kind of a job. And the other guy works at, like I said, they have no criminal history at all, nothing. And so I started looking into where they've been. They had their cell phones. So I have these, we have people that work what's called technical electronic investigation assistants or something with these detectives. And I give them phones. I need you to do a dump on the phone. You know, they dump all the data down. And I get on Dwan Anderson's phone, I get a number that he called just before midnight. He was the first calls, the shots being fired were just after 2 a.m. So just before midnight, he'd made a call. So I started doing some research on that call to see who he was calling and can't find anything. Finally, I just called the number and a guy answered. This is 2 or 3 days after the murder. The guy answered and I said, hey, I'm investigating Dwan Anderson's murder and I see he called you. He goes, oh yeah. And the guy didn't bother to call me and tell me that he talked to him. But well, what was that all about? He said, Dwan told me, he called me and he said he was at our place, or that's R, the letter R place, which is a gay bar on Capitol Hill in Seattle. And he said he was down there with the other guy who was the other victim, which was Ahmed Saeed. And he wanted me to come down. So he said, yeah, I went down there. And I know Dwan really well. I know Saeed casually, but not really. Just he's a friend of Dwan's. And so he starts telling me that Dwan was busy on his phone. And he goes, I think he was on Grindr. And then he said, I'm gonna Grindr, if you guys don't know, I'm sure you do, is an app that gay men use to find other gay men in the geographical area. And then he said, some guy's gonna meet us outside after the bar closes. Okay. And he says, another of their friends was there. So after the bar closes, they go outside and there's this guy standing there. And he describes him as a black male, maybe 25. And he goes, something about him, but I tried to be friendly, but he kind of just stared away and didn't really talk to me. And he goes, yeah, they were going to leave and they offered me a ride. But this guy creeped me out so much. I go, what creeped you out about him? And he goes, he just didn't look right. I said, you mean he didn't look gay? Is that what you mean? He goes, that's exactly what I mean. He didn't look gay to me. And so he said they walked to Ahmed's car. And I said, wait a second. Ahmed had a car? Nobody told me about Ahmed having a car. And this is 3 days after the murder. And so, yeah, it was parked. He showed me, I drove him up there and he showed me where it was parked. And I found a couple of surveillance cameras on the way. So I sent those same people up there, detectives, the technical guys, and said, I need the surveillance video you get from this or cameras. And in this little lot a half block away. And so we call Ahmed's family and we say, did Ahmed have a car? And he goes, yeah. Do you know where it is? No. They didn't bother to mention that to us either, right? So we looked in Department of Licensing and found all vehicles registered to. We found this car. It was like a newer Toyota. And we put a thing out citywide. We're looking for this car, maybe involved in a homicide. Now, 10 minutes later, we get a call of a patrol unit in southeast Seattle saying, I got that car parked on a residential street down in southeast Seattle, which is 7-8 miles from the crime scene. So we go down to that crime scene with that car, and there's the car parked. But on the rocker panels on the outside, blood has poured out of them. So, I mean, there's just big things of blood pouring out of them. So obviously, this murder happened in that car. At least it started out. So we tow the car, and we have it taken down to a vehicle processing room we have. And I have CSI people process the car for me, have it fingerprinted. One of the fingerprint techs was in the back seat, and she dusted the rear passenger driver's side window, and she finds a palm print on there. Okay, she develops palm print. She runs it through APHIS, which is the automated fingerprint identification system, and she comes up with the name Ali Muhammad Brown. Okay, so Ali Muhammad Brown is a Muslim-sounding name. Ahmed Saeed is Muslim. So just because you find the fingerprints or something like that, or even DNA, doesn't mean that's a killer. Maybe it was put there innocently. So we call Ahmed's family and goes, "Do you guys know Ali Muhammad Brown?" They never heard of him. So I start to do some research on him. I find out that he's actually been arrested for helping try to raising money for ISIS in ISIS in the Middle East. And he was when he was like 18, and he got convicted of it. And that's how come we had his palm prints. And so then I find out he was arrested in Siskiyou, California, which is in Northern California, not far south of the Oregon border near Mount Shasta. Like this is in April of that year. And he'd been driving a silver Dodge Durango, and he got stopped and didn't have a license. He had some dope on him, and they took him to jail, towed the car. In the meantime, he was let out. So later that same day, one of the sergeants in the office comes out and says, "Hey, I just got a call from Jake Pavlovich, who is a detective with the King County Sheriff's Office, which handles all the unincorporated areas of Seattle. And their offices are actually just across the street from ours." And he says, he's investigating a murder where a silver Dodge Durango was used. And I went, "What? He's doing what?" He goes, "Yeah, silver Dodge Durango." And so I call him up. I know him real well. "Hey, Jake, what are you doing?" He goes, "I got this murder happened. It was a drive-by, no apparent reason. And he got silver Dodge Durango on video driving up to the victim. And he's shot just off camera." I said, "I'm handling a double right now where I know my guy drives the silver Dodge Durango." He goes, "I'll be right over." So he and his partner come over. In the meantime, I had already gotten I had submitted my spent shell casings to the crime lab. And one of the things you do is they do them, they process them, they run them through different programs. But one of the things they do is they give you an opinion as the type of weapon it was fired from. And the crime lab had told me this gun was probably fired from from a Smith & Wesson M+P, which stands for Military Plus Police, 9mm handgun. So Pavlovich comes over, and I pull up a close-up photo of one of the head stamps on my casing, and I show it to him. He goes, "That's the same brand ammunition as I have." I go, "Did you get an opinion on the type of weapon?" He goes, "Yeah, it's Smith & Wesson M+P 9mm. I said, "That's the same as mine." So we pick up the phone and call the crime lab. I say, "I want you to compare my casings to Jake's casings, one-on-one." "Okay." You get a call back, and about a half hour later, same gun. Okay, so my guy did it. The same guy did it. And then I filled him in on Ali Muhammad Brown. His guy was a guy, he lived in Gary, Indiana, I think it was, his victim. And there was so much gang activity going on there, and this kid was not a gangbanger. His parents wanted him to go out and live with his uncle, who lived in the area of Skyway, just south of the Seattle city limits. And one night his uncle says, "Hey, would you walk down to the store there and get me some potato chips and pop?" Yeah. So, it's like 9:00 at night. He walks down there. You can see him walking back with his grocery bag, just not minding any business. You see this silver Dodge Durango pull up, and they're just off camera when you see multiple flashes. He shot like 10 times, and they come there. He's dead at the scene. Ironically, he tried to get away from gang violence, and he gets killed in a drive-by in Seattle. So anyway, we pull our ducks in a row. Where I have the fugitive. I get him charged with. I get Ali Muhammad Brown charged with the 2 murders I'm doing first. We don't charge him with the third one yet intentionally. We just do the 2. We don't want anybody to know they're related, because once they get out there, that could be a serial killer. It's a clusterfuck. Anyway, that's a technical term, by the way. So we're doing this, and I got the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force out looking for this guy. His sister lives up in a place in North Seattle, and one day they're there, and the silver Dodge Durango's there, and they're on stakeout, and they watch it, and the Durango leaves. So one of the guys follows it, and it drives it, and it's not him. It's a woman who was later identified as his wife with a couple of kids. And she goes all the way to Tacoma, which is 35, 40 miles south, and to an apartment. Then we finally go in there. He's not there. His sister, who's obviously radicalized, is in there, and she didn't want to tell us much. So anyway, I'm back in my office, and then I get a phone call. It's from this detective in a town called Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey. And he goes, hey, we had an attempted carjacking last night. This is like a resort town on the Jersey Shore. We had an attempted carjacking, and the black guy pulled the gun on the guy and got him out of the car, but it was a stick, and he didn't know how to drive a stick. So he jumped out and ran. And he goes, he went into a store nearby and changed clothes. We got him on surveillance video there. And so I found out later that this guy had been in a restaurant in town the night before and didn't have money to pay for his bill. So he had the waitress call his brother in Seattle and got the credit card number over the phone. And he says, so I went back to the restaurant and I said, you still have that number? And yeah, right here. So he says, I called the brother and I just pretended I was still working on, just trying to straighten out this whole restaurant thing. And he says, I asked him, I said, yeah, your brother called you and said he needed to pay for the restaurant? Yeah. Okay, what's your brother's name? And he goes, and his brother tells him, Ali Muhammad Brown. Oh, okay, thanks. He says, then he runs Ali Muhammad Brown. He goes, holy shit, he's wanted for a double murder in Seattle. And this is it. I mean, there are 2 detectives in this police department. He's never handled anything near a murder in his life. So I said, send me the surveillance video, a snip from the surveillance video of the store. And he does. And it sure as hell, it's Ali Muhammad Brown. And he goes, up in West Orange, New Jersey, a week ago, West Orange is right across the river from Manhattan. There was a kid that was shot multiple times in his car, and for no reason, he was like a guy coming back from his freshman year at college, and he was just killed for no apparent reason. He goes, I wonder if that could be the same guy. Well, I don't know. So I call up to West Orange, and it's in that area. The prosecutor's office has homicide task force. I talked to them, Essex County Prosecutor Homicide Task Force. It's made up of detectives from Newark and all the surrounding towns. And I say, hey, I heard about this murder. This kid is, by the way, his name was Brendan Tevlin. This case eventually made the national news, by the way. And he goes, Brendan Tevlin, and he goes, yeah, he was shot and killed. He goes, yeah, we heard shots fired at this intersection. Actually, the intersection, it was a very wealthy part of town. It wasn't the ghetto at all. And he said, and they got there and found casings in the street, but nothing else. And then a while later, a mile down the street in the parking lot of an apartment building, they found his car parked, and he was stuffed dead in the passenger side floor. He'd been shot about 10 times. He'd been over at his friend's playing Xbox or whatever, and he texted his mom about 11 o'clock and said, I'm on my way home, but he never got home. So I said, what kind of weapon? He goes, 9mm. He goes, do you get an opinion on the type of weapon that was used? He goes, yeah, they say it's a Smith & Wesson M+P. I said, let me tell you what, I'm working a serial case in Seattle. We have 3 victims here. That gun is the same type of gun and same caliber of gun that our guy used, and I know he's in New Jersey. So I think it might be the same guy. And oh, no, this is a robbery gone bad. That's what they said. They had their minds. You know why? Here's the deal. Because in Essex County, New Jersey, almost all the murders that they investigate are gangbangs or robberies. So that's all you ever see. You assume everything is. And that's tunnel vision. You get it. So I said, here's the deal. When that whole robbery thing goes south, give me a call back. Okay. In the meantime, I called the crime lab and I said, I want you to run those casings from Pavlovich in my case. I want to from NIBUS, which is the National Ballistics Database. And he did. And he says, they come back matched to casings that are in West Orange, New Jersey. Yeah. So a day or so later, they call me back from New Jersey. He says, can you send us some casings? I go, yeah, I'll send you some casings. So I send them some. Sure shit, same gun. They still think he must have paired up with this with these gangbangers. I'm thinking about this guy is a lone wolf. He is not pairing up with anybody. It's just him. in the meantime, they'd had a bunch of street robberies in that area, of wealthy area. And so we, two patrol officers from the town, they were looking around, and this one robbery happened, and there's this hill that goes up. He goes, the guy ran up the hill. We should go up there and see if we can see any evidence. So they go up to the top, and this house back there is like a mansion, and it overlooks Manhattan. So it's right there. And there's a wooded area behind it. And they walk back to the wooded area, and there's a tent, and there's a guy sleeping in the tent. It was Ollie Muhammad Brown. He had a gun in his pants. So they get him in custody right away, because I think it would have been a shootout if they hadn't. And so I'm actually, so that afternoon, I'm actually at the scene of another murder, a murder-suicide. I'm standing over the body of an older woman whose son killed her and then killed himself. My phone rings, and they go, we have Brown in custody in New Jersey. Okay, I hang up. The next morning, me, Jake Pavlovich, another detective, and a prosecutor on a flight to New Jersey. And so we go through this whole thing. We meet up with the detectives. They're very nice people, very nice guys. And after a long time, we finally were able to talk to him, and we take him in. And unfortunately, we have to do it in the jail, because they go, their headquarters for their task force was in a converted office building. And they go, we can't bring him back here. The commander said, we can't bring him back here. I said, why not? He's too dangerous. And I thought to myself, wow, we should call the police. But instead we go to the jail, which is not ideal to talk to somebody, because every time you're talking, you're cell bleep over the thing, interrupting you and stuff. And we go in and we talk to him for an hour or two. And one of the things I said to him is, I think you had a message here. You're trying to send a message. What was it? And he was hemming and hawing. Finally, he said, why are you worried about these people? These are only 4 people. He says, thousands of people have been killed in Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria by U.S. bombs. These people don't mean anything. And then he admits he's on a jihad. It's his jihadist thing. And he told us what he was looking for. He was only looking for single males or males together, and that no children, no women, no elderly. And so he just waits till he finds them, and he does that. And so back to my case with Ahmed Saeed. Why do you suppose Ahmed Saeed was shot several times in the face and killed more than the other guy? Go on, Jess. Any idea? No, but he found him but you're close. He found him on Grindr, so he knew Saeed was gay. And not only was he gay, he was a Muslim gay. And of course, to radicalize Muslims, gayness is a death penalty, right? And so he was offended that a gay man, or excuse me, a Muslim man would be gay, and that's why he attacked him more. Of course, he told me, he said right away, "Oh, this wasn't a hate crime. It wasn't about that." And then he just started railing on gay people and this and that. It shouldn't be. It's not natural and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, he did this whole thing, and admitted all that. Then he didn't made it. He went to trial. I had to go back to New Jersey in December of 2015 or 16. I forgot. And no, 15. It was just, no, it was 16, because I was working for the Attorney General's then, and for a pretrial hearing, and I testified. And suddenly, after a week or two later, he, against his attorney's advice, pled guilty to that murder of Brendan Tevlin, and explained that he'd been hiding in the bushes and waited, and he just saw Tevlin pull up, walked up to him, didn't say a word, and just shot him like 10 times and shoved him over, drove him off. And then as he was pleading guilty, he goes, "Yeah, I killed those people in Seattle too." So this case went on and on and on because, well, COVID was part of it. And then because of legal wrangling, he actually only returned to Seattle and was sentenced last November for the murders of the 3 here. And he was sentenced in New Jersey. He was sentenced to life without parole. And then he was also charged with the first ever, only historic state terrorist charge. So he was a jihadist serial killer because he was killing people with a cooling period in between as part of a central plan. It wasn't psychosexual like Dwayne or that type of thing. But it was still, he's still a serial killer. He still did it, and he's going to do his time in New Jersey. Anybody have any questions about that? Oh, I do see that all the time. And the thing is, that works to great advantage to me as an interrogator, because I just sit back and let the rope unwind while they see all this stuff, and they don't even realize they're putting around their own throats and then hanging themselves. But Dwayne was that way. That's why he had the balls to call when he was in custody for a robbery, thinking he could get out of that, giving information on a serial killing that we wouldn't catch on to that. You know, that he was that way a lot. I believe Muhammad was to a certain extent, although he was just a radicalized Muslim. He talked about he didn't want to take credit for this. You know, he says, well, you know, boasting is against the law in my thing. It's not about boasting. It's about, if you believe something enough to go out like this, you have to be man enough to take the blame or credit for it. And we worked back and forth over that 3 or 4 times. Unfortunately, most of my interrogations I have audio videotaped. Dwayne, we were in a car, and it wasn't a situation where I could do that. And Ali Muhammad Brown was audio taped also, but we were in a jail, which was a nightmare. You know, that's a good question, because I sent out, because he went by bus, right? He didn't fly. So I sent out things through fusion centers or intelligence things saying, you know, this guy probably stopped somewhere on the way and killed somebody. These are what we're looking for. Who knows if the right person saw it, you know, and ever because they're just saying, well, we got one guy shot. Oh, well, another shooting, move on. You know, who knows if they even looked at all this or ran them through NIBUS. I don't know, but I would be surprised if there weren't others in the way. He didn't confess to any others, but I would be surprised. Because we're talking about smart narcissistic serial killers. I want to tell you a story about a stupid serial killer that I wasn't involved in the investigation, just the end of it, and just how stupid and how fast this went. This case was out of Arizona. Oh my gosh. Well, you would think Prescott, but they pronounce it Prescott, Arizona, where gay men were being killed in parks there. And they had several. And this guy in jail down there had told other inmates that he did it at different times. But the prosecutor didn't want to go to trial based on jailhouse snitches. Well, the thing, of course, you know, a lot of times that's how you only get that. And the way you do that is you make sure you can show that the jailhouse snitches don't know about each other. They're all individuals, and they're saying basically the same things. And then that he, you know, that there's no way they're collaborating their stories. So then this detective called me from down there, and she said, this guy is in the Seattle area, and we're going to try to find him. And we could, maybe I was hoping we could get something set up where we could do an undercover sting on him and go to admit it. Yeah, sure, no problem. Come on up. Well, they came up, and we were looking, couldn't find this guy. He's like transient on the street. They were up for 4 or 5 days, couldn't find him, so they had to go back. Then about 3 weeks later, I get another call from him. He goes, where's Bellingham? I said, well, Bellingham's about 100 miles north of Seattle. Why? Because this guy is in the Whatcom County Jail in Bellingham right now. And he goes, do you know anybody up there? I go, no, but just come on up. We'll help you. We'll drive 100 miles. We don't care. So they came up, and I got 2 undercover detectives. You know, these guys, you would never, one of them is tatted all over. He's got one of those long string beards, you know, that's all tied together and everything. And this other guy, we get him, and the way we're taking them to the Bellingham Police Department. First of all, we wire them. They have body wires on. And what we're going to do is we're going to have this guy go in the Whatcom County Jail, which is a relatively small jail. This is where Western Washington University is, this town. And so it's also other claim to fame for serial killers is it's the last place that Kenneth Bianchi killed those 2 girls, and he's in prison here because of that in Bellingham. But anyway, So we got we had them transported separately in police cars. They went through the whole booking process, photos, this, that, jumpsuits. And what we're going to do is have them one at a time. They have a nurse's station and a waiting area outside the nurse's station. So we bring the first guy through, Todd is his name, and he's in that nurse's station. And then a few minutes later, we bring the bad guy in, and he sits down. And we're listening to the wire. We can hear everything. I'm sitting in a car with my partner outside the jail. We can hear the whole conversations. And we're expecting this is going to take a long time. So we get in there, and he gets in there, and the guy says, "Hi, hey, how you doing?" He goes, "Good." He goes, "What are you in for?" That's what they always ask first. And Todd goes, "This gay guy touched my nephew, and I beat the shit out of him." And the guy looks at him and goes, "Oh, I killed a bunch of fags down in Arizona." Just like that. Just like that. And we were done. Before the second guy got in, he was in custody. He confessed to a police officer undercover at that time. And so they charged him. He was convicted down in Arizona. That was it. That's a stupid serial killer. Another stupid serial killer, of course, from my neighborhood is Garrett Ridgway, who is the Green River Killer, who only lived about 3 miles from me. And he has like an 82 IQ. But he just got lucky in the mess. He finally got caught. But not all serial killers are smart. Some of them are really, really stupid.